Okay, I'll see you in a few minutes. Let's go on to section 4, chapter 4. The patterns stuck with us for much of the work, but finally, the potteries, the Italian potteries, stuck with us for much of the work, but finally threw up their hands and stood their ground when we got up enough courage to come out with our ultimate request. Do not use that one-dimensional, white, flat, talc-based clay body. Use traditional terracotta clay with traditional Mallorca glaze. They were abhorred at the idea. Their hands went up. You see, the red terracotta clay is in the blood of the Italians and would still be part of them now. But for the gross destruction of the American dollar in the 1980s and 1990s, which sapped the roots from the boot of it, America's ignorant rejection of the nature of clay has all but whitewashed the world with a pasty, almost chalk-like material now used in most industrial production where true terracotta once glowed. We Americans didn't understand the qualities of clay and the beauty of the differences. We wanted everything sterile, lifeless, McDonaldified, like the satin smooth white bread hamburger bun. We didn't want to learn from cultures because we were right. We didn't want to bother bringing in the true grit. We wanted fast, cheap, and no question to ask kind of production with only le look, not the smell, feel, taste, and life of life. As the almighty dollar rose in demand, the well-founded history and know-how of Italy and others fell into disuse and even denial. Today, they look blankly when we wax romantic about the character and patina of their own history. So there was no hope of changing this tide with only one small halting voice. Basta. Enough. So what I'm looking at now, what I'm realizing is there's this sterile, there's a very strong kind of a revival from maybe Victorian times in America where people were afraid of germs. They were afraid of disease. They were always, washing and putting on perfumes and doing whatever they could to, be just clean as a whistle. And or they were afraid for their children, what they were. And there were a lot of factories developing then and smoke in the air and things that, probably weren't very good to be bringing into your life. But now it's, all of those things are cleared away, but people have this strong imagination that, dirt could get in that, or, it's not white, because when you work with red clay, terracotta clay, you're going to see, hard to show, actually this piece doesn't have much to show. Oh, I know, here's an example, like pinholes. See that? Can you see that? Wait, right where my thumb is. See that little hole? Yeah, it's kind of got a hole in it. That's a pinhole. And sometimes there are much bigger pinholes and more of them. And they think, oh, dirt will get in my food dish and, and I'll get sick and maybe I'll die. And so people have just gotten stranger and stranger about this. So you can see how the American idea started to kind of white bread everything. So that was really hard because we loved all the peculiarities of the terracotta clay. and the old beautiful Majolica glaze that poured over it, that made it white, but by tin rather than white, only white. All the way through, it had this feeling, this warmth. So I made a list here. Superfluous was to emphasize, one, the formality of the shape. This pattern was to emphasize the formality of the shape, the historic story of the blue and white painting. And there's a real important story about that. It was called the Blue Onion. The first imports from China back in the 18th century to America were one pattern from China. It was porcelain clay, which is naturally white because it comes from the tops of the mountains. So it hasn't gathered debris, dead bugs and, leaves and dirt and other minerals along the way till it gets to the riverbed, and then it becomes what we call red clay, terracotta clay. So what was imported from China for dinnerware to the early Americans before we had our own pottery started was porcelain, or we call it China because it came from China, right? And it was always the blue onion design. It was always this blue painting around the room. So it was a very big tradition. So this is a tradition to have this blue and white design, patterning. So the formality of the shape, the historical story of the blue, I'll tell you someday what I just told you. The old world pin striping in the fold of the flange. That's the little click-clack track. The ancient Italian science of drawing in perspective. The subtle lushness of detail in the transition of the rim to a patina to highlight the depth of raw terracotta fiddlebacks. Okay, so you don't understand that, but see this patina on here? Do you see? You can see it here better. See this? See, it's darker as you look over it in between the sections of the here. You can see it here too. So there's a patina that's rubbed into it that shows the undulations in the terracotta clay. That's made with manganese. Okay, so these were all just a list of things that we wanted to remember in making this design. Each elegant element juxtaposed against the next, then framed with a raw red terracotta edge. Okay, chapter 5. We were never afforded the realization of that whilst in Italy. That's a very important sentence. The dust of the gilded last score of the 20th century had not worn thin enough to stop their basking in it and reflecting upon it. They had lost the art of clay technology and the will to unearth the science which would have led to experimentation and discovery again, a past lost in pride. The Italian workers had got so rich off of our business, America, and in the last score of the 20th century. And here, and they thought, well, of course it's going to pick up again, well, there'll be a new generation and they'll be wanting more and so on. But they didn't. It didn't happen. And so here we came with a new idea using their old talents and skills. What a perfect blend. What a gift to all of us. And they couldn't accept it. So we acquiesced and glazed over the whole work, painted the borders in violet and platinum, which turned my tongue to a deep, bitter purple, which brought the meaning of the work to ruin and eventually colored our perceptions of progress in that world. Let me show you what I'm talking about here. this kind of work right here is many, many firings. You have to first do a bisque fire. And then, wait, no. After you put the patina on here of the manganese and rub it in, then you do a bisque fire, which is kind of like firing it to the softness of a flower pot. You know, flower pots, they're very dry and they're not very strong. They break easily. That's because they need to be porous to let the water and the weather pass in and out of them to be the closest that it can be to a plant growing in the earth. So that's why terracotta pots are soft. So the bisque fire is like halfway up to the final temperature. Then it's gone through a chemical change. So if you dip it in water, it will not dissolve. It will not turn to mud again. But so it had to be at that, but it still has to be porous enough to suck up the glaze. So you dip it in the glaze and it sucks up the glaze. Immediately it dries. And then you wipe off the foot, make sure the foot is clean, and then you fire the pot up to its final temperature. But then there are more firings because after, oh wait, I forgot to tell you something. Oh, this is really crazy. Before you do the bisque firing, after you put the patina on the terracotta edge, you have to wax the edge. You have to wax this edge all the way around and on the surface all the way into this little groove here. And it can't go past that little groove or it will, okay, so putting wax on it resists the glaze. It resists the water in the glaze. So the glaze can't stick to this. It just rolls right off, like water off a duck's back, because the duck's back is oily and greasy, like wax. So that's the next step after you put the patina. Then you wax this. No, wait a minute. Yeah, then you wax that and dip it in the glaze, the base glaze, which is this. This is Majolica glaze. And then you fire it, and this stays clean. You see, it stays just the raw clay all the way around. And then you start with the next process, which is putting on, well, I don't want to jump ahead because we're not there yet. I'll just tell you, this adds a lot more labor to each piece because of the delicacy of keeping a very perfect line here where the wax has to go. Okay, so they did not want to have anything to do with any of this. Terracotta clay, Majolica glaze, wax, nothing. So that's where we started to realize that eventually our perceptions of progress in that world would have to end. But we didn't know what, after all the work we'd gone through, we didn't know what was going to happen next. Chapter 6. This is more of the spiritual journey here. Avast, there was yet another monumental yield required. This was the ultimate test of our humility and loyalty to the greater source of the idea. It was then that we bowed our heads in submission to the divine creator. That was when we were shown, albeit through tribulation, the full glory of his design. It was indeed that moment which actually led to an invention which we would finally celebrate. We felt a great weight lifted off our self-imposed burden, and the childlike freedom of invention hailed us home to harmony and happiness again. 'Twas all because of two uncontrollable bureaucratic interventions that this invention was set free. It's funny. Two bureaucratic interventions which set our invention free. 1. The American Food and Drug Administration would not admit functional table service into the United States with a crackled glaze. One of the silent undeniable requirements of this collection, even though all ceramic surfaces crackle in practical use. All of you have seen that your dishes, after use, crackle. The government cracks down on all original crackle. Now, I think I missed a part in the story, because when we were making these decals, we remember the surface, we wanted it to be that it was old. We liked that old patina and that worn attitude that you with the lead glazed pieces. But the only way to get there was to kind of do some of the superficial things to make them have that attitude. And so we decided to make a glaze that crackled away from, the way crackle glaze works is the object is made out of one kind of a clay body, and then the glaze is made to be so that it will shrink away only slightly. It doesn't actually make a split in it. It just cracks. And then the patina in between makes it come to life. So we were counting on that as one of the important elements, because imagine those decals just on this shiny white. It would have lost all the beauty that they get by being on this crackly. Oh, that's wrong picture. On this, see? You see the crackles? You can hardly see them. See in there? So it gives it some life that we really felt was important. Okay, so that was the first thing. The Food and Drug said, you cannot sell dishes that have crackle glaze. And second, since the euro was by then escalating beyond the point of undulation, the hand-painted work was now priced for the exclusive market, for a most exclusive market, the immediate family of the royal Saudis. They're the only people who could have afforded these dishes, because to be hand-painted, and it would have been impossible to sell them in America by that time. Whatever were we to do? We were really like in a rock and a hard place. I had never liked the idea of ceramic transfers, decals, unless for the purpose of making them work as a design element which could only be expressed through the hand of the silk screen, not the hand of the hand, but the hand of the silk screen. With our work under MacKenzie-Childs, we had invented the funny contrast of hand painting with decals as a design-conscious decision. This invention of purpose was the first in history. Historically, transfers were used to imitate, not to state. We actually used ceramic glaze transfers as an element of visual play. The first time we played with print was when we used traditional floral transfers, like the flowers on my grandmother's and grandfather's bedroom walls, in order to contrast with lovely freehand yellow splots, as we called them. A field of tiny yellow freeform dots were hand decorated on the surface. Then in the next firing, we added the randomly sprinkled floral transfers. It was fresh and appealing and protocol breaking. I have one example of that still in our little cottage on the sea here. Just a second, I'll get it. Mug that we used to keep our straws in. Did I ever tell you the story of our straws? Whilst working in Czech Republic on glass, it was right after they first opened up to the world from communism, and we were staying in a dormitory because they didn't have hotels yet in Prague. And I opened up a cupboard and I saw these straws, with their little papers on them. And I wondered, what? They must have like a little icebox in here somewhere where we could keep cold beverages. Well, it turned out that when I opened up one of the straws, I found a straw. Can I see this? Yes, I can barely. Isn't that amazing? Straws used to be made of straw. That's what they used to be made of. And in Czech Republic, they were still made of straw at that time. I just loved it, so I saved them all these years. But anyway, this is why I'm showing you this mug. I probably told you that story, didn't I? Well, anyway, you see, remember I told you that there were these, we painted this first with these yellow little splots all around. And then in the last firing, we would cut and place, this is just a small little piece, but some dinner plates, we had it all over the whole dinner plate. And we cut these little transfers and put them on. And they were from an old factory, actually. An old decal factory. So they're very old-fashioned decals. But isn't that fun? And then also here, same thing. We use the ceramic decals in between the checks. I was just wondering if there's anything else I need to show you on this. I don't think so. So there you go. I don't know where to put this. Okay. So, what was I telling you about now? Oh, okay, well, I didn't really like the idea of decal things, but I did when we started playing with decals in a new way, in this new invention. It was fresh and appealing and protocol breaking, and that's what we like to do. So, there we were again with the challenge of how to use a decal. The original honest reason was for the purpose of imitation. The thing, however, that we knew was that though it seemed like a solution, at the level we would need a decal, full cover and full color, we would be paying more for a transfer decal than for hand painting. Even in Italy, where the costs for hand painting were high, the costs for decals were even higher. Now, when people first started using decals or transfers, it was because it was cheaper than hand painting. It was even higher than Italian hand painting, which was already through the roof. We couldn't afford it. So the whole thing was really a weird experience for me, because I wanted to use decals, but in a way, not an economic way, in a way of play. Well, God took us all the way. You'll see in a minute. Okay. Indeed, the decal was prohibitively high. We were forced to consider giving up on this design, which had been such a gift, and after so much toil, seemed wasteful. There seemed to be nothing else but to give up. But wait, I recall. Just as the verdict was stated so know-it-allingly from Donatella, the manageress with Marcoa Epifanti, swallowed in the shadow of her diagnosis, I had nowhere to look to. Suddenly, and without will, I was removed from the room. So we were at this decal manufacturer, Marcoa Epifanti, and talking to this lady, Donatella, the manageress. And all of a sudden I was just out of there. I don't know how I don't even remember going, but I just was lifted out. I was removed from the room by my own walking away from it all. I floated down a long stone hallway, the sound of my own steps hollow following me, and stopped in the sun pattern on the floor at the understuffed reception turret at the top of the spiral staircase, downward to the guard's lookout. Richard and I, as artists, always yielded not to the material law of economy and impossibility, but to the source of it all. An inventor and seer must weigh in on and finally hold a banner for a higher reality of reason, then humbly fight as per his intuition. I wanted to feel the wings of discovery. I knew so well and could feel fluttering within. I had to let them escape. Again, without will, I found myself not back in the room to negotiate a hopelessly prohibitive cost, but in my little tin Panda. That's like the cheapest car in Italy, the Panda, puttering along the road back to Florence. There, I sat in stillness in my cloisters. Someday, I will also tell you how we lived in Florence after another storybook. I already told you that story. I looked up at a lithograph on the wall. And it was way up high on the wall, I remember. The drawing, the lines, the soft and the heart of it, I loved it for its starkness. I needed that rest just then, and then it came. The answer came. I smiled at the lithograph and at the Creator. I knew. Chapter 7.